I'm John Law, this is Chasing Cars, and today, as promised, we're pitting the two commercial vehicle titans against each other, the ute and the humble van, to find out which is really better and which you should consider for your next multi-purpose vehicle purchase. In the silver corner, we have the Ford Transit Custom Sport long-wheelbase 5-seater. You may remember this as our long-term van. It was mine to start with, but the keys quickly became popular and it's ended up as the AV Cruise favorite. Obviously, because you can cart heaps of stuff around in it, and it's actually quite comfortable. It's genuinely nice to drive, and that's what got us thinking whether we should compare it to the Ford Ranger. This is regularly Australia's best-selling vehicle at the moment, and in fact, Ford sells 17 times more Rangers than it does Transit Customs in Australia. So I guess the battle's already been decided, but we want to know why. We want to understand why the Ranger is so much more popular than the van, which actually drives really nicely. So we've got in the Sport, so the same effective trim level, couple of differences. This misses out on heated seats, which the Transit gets, but it does get leather upholstery, but they're effectively the same. And we have the V6 here today because we couldn't get the 2-litre twin turbo, but it's not so much about powertrains, it's more about how these vehicle types work for their owners. Today's comparison is going to be focused on 5 key aspects of a multi-purpose vehicle, starting with cargo capacity and security, followed up by off-road ability. Then we're going to come to on-road ride quality, followed by urban usability, and finally, a really intriguing one, passive safety. And I say intriguing because utes tend to get a pretty bad rap, and this one's on all-terrain tires, so that should be interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below and hit subscribe to Chasing Cars if you haven't done so already. Let's get into the video. Chasing Cars, honest reviews of your next car. Brought to you by Budget Direct. Driving either of these vehicles in the city where I happen to live was never something I was expecting to be easy. It's sort of something you'd have to get used to because they're both over 5 meters long, which is quite large, but I was expecting the Transit to be a little bit easier to live with because of that short bonnet, and I was anticipating better visibility. But the truth is, with windows all around rather than the shell, the Range is actually a little bit easier to see out of in all directions but forward. And there's one other big problem, and that is height. In Sydney, there are a lot of car parks with maximum heights of 1.9 meters, and the Transit Custom is nearly 2 meters tall, 1.985 meters tall. So bigger than me. The Ranger, when you don't have the roof racks on, easily fits into most car parks in Sydney, which is maybe not what you'd expect, but it is indeed the case. While we're on the subject of car parks, there is one big benefit to the Transit Custom, and that is if some unit in a Ranger parks too close to you, can't get into the driver's door, no worries. You've got a sliding door, nice and light, easy to do, walk through, because there's only 2 front seats, no third one in the middle. You're in your van, ready to go. While we're on the subject of everyday usability, I thought we'd talk a bit about the interiors of both the Ranger and the Transit Custom, focusing on things like practicality and materials to split these two vehicles. And we're going to start off with the Ranger because, based on sales figures, you're more likely to know what this is like. So let's recap. We've got the mid-spec Sport here, and generally materials are quite dark, quite black, quite workmanlike, if you like. There's lots of coarse graining, fairly heavy-duty use of hard plastics up on the dashboard around here. You know, it's not luxurious, but also it's not going to scratch up like chrome would. And you do have lashings of some soft touch up on the doors here, for example, and where you rest your arm on the armrest. The driving position is actually quite a lot lower than in the Transit as well. I know that sounds strange, but because the dash is high and the bonnet's long, this almost feels a bit more big SUV-like, whereas the Transit Custom feels decidedly van-like. Now, what about storage? Because the Ranger does that pretty well. We've got 2 big cup holders in the center here, and you've also got nice usable door bins, a very wide center cubby here with a 12-volt socket, and then we've got some nice bespoke touches that you don't see in other cars, like this Macca's chippy holder, and also this rubberized storage tray, which doubles as a wireless charging pad for your phone. It means it doesn't slip around when you're driving around twisty bends, which is really nice. Also easily accessible are the USB charge points, and you've also got this extra little rubberized storage tray here in front of the passenger, just above the fairly generous glove box. So Ranger does pretty well then, and the seats are also quite comfortable. The only miss here that I get in the Transit is the fact that although I have leather upholstery, which I guess you could argue is a little bit nicer, but it's certainly easier to clean, you don't get heated seats and you don't get a heated steering wheel. And in winter, even in Australia, that does kind of suck. Jumping into the Transit Custom, and the storage in here really does level up. We'll start with beverage holders. You've got cup holders up here that are perfect for a coffee. You've got another 2 in the center here, and really deep door bins. Now, these door cards are actually multi-layered. They've got 3 levels of storage. Right down the bottom is for stuff that you don't need to use very much. Then you've got some pretty big, generous storage in the middle, and a great spot for sort of pens and pen knives and that sort of thing right at the top. Storage doesn't end there, of course, because even though you don't have a center console, you have these really big, really generous twin glove boxes, one that opens up, one that opens down. Plus, for more hidden storage, you've got this space down here, which actually hides a wireless phone charger. It's also easily accessible by the USB-A and the USB-C charging ports, as well as the 12-volt socket. And in terms of material quality, it is very similar to the Ranger in most senses. You've got a hard, scratchy dashboard top, and you do have hard plastics up here, but you have lovely soft armrests, which are obviously captain's chairs. So good, so comfy, and the leather on the steering wheel feels that much nicer in the hands. The Ranger's back seat is just about best in class in the dual cab segment, but honestly, that's not saying much. Space on offer isn't too bad for me at 188 centimeters. This is my driving position. As you can see, because the seats are quite heavily scalloped, I've got a pretty good amount of knee room, and toe room, they just slide under there, but I could come up a little bit higher with the Power Adjust front seat. The real issue is the sort of bench comfort. It's quite upright in the backrest and not super supportive under my thighs. Again, better than a lot of them out there, but not incredible. The middle seat's also pretty compromised, plus you've got a big transmission tunnel back here. The only really good thing about this car is my visibility. Because I'm so much higher than the front seat, I can see straight over the top, straight through the windscreen, so that might be quite nice on a longer road trip. The other thing to take into account is although you've got ISOFIX tabs, if you want to access the top tethers, you have to fold the backrest forwards, and it's a one-piece backrest, which just makes things such a faff. Now, in the Transit Custom, it's even more of a faff because the backrest doesn't fold and you have to sort of fiddle around behind there. So I guess you could say the Ranger wins on that front. Plus, in the back here, the power windows do go all the way down for a nice view out the sides. Now, the back seat of the Transit Custom, this has some real highs and lows. For a start, I do have a fairly high set bench back here, so I can see out the front really well, and not having a middle seat means this would be quite a nice place to sit on a road trip. It's also properly wide, with each of these seats genuinely usable for an adult with nice sculpting to hold you in. But it's not all good back here, because even though I have quite a lot of knee room, as you can see, because the seats are mounted all the way down to the floor, toe room is sort of non-existent, so I'm actually not that comfortable back here. And there are a couple of things that feel like afterthoughts. For example, the USB charger location stuck on the back of the front passenger chair just looks a little bit cheap. And then there's no real armrest for me on the sliding door, which again is great, but it has its practicality limitations for sure, including storage in here, which is just sort of, I can see Ford's tried really hard to make it a practical family car, but it just hasn't quite succeeded. And then the nail in the coffin for the Transit, especially for my dogs who love to stick their head out the window while we're driving along, is the fact that the windows, well, they don't really open. They're just a little pop-out rear quarter window. And yeah, in a world where we're expecting a lot more from multi-purpose vehicles, if you're going to be putting children or, again, dogs back here all the time, that's the sort of thing that really does feel like a limitation. Let's talk off-road ability. The Ford Ranger is pretty well proven in this category. You've got decent ground clearance. This car's fitted with optional all-terrain Goodyear tyres. You've got full-time four-wheel drive. You've got a low-range transfer case, and you've got myriad drive modes depending on what surface you're on. All of which means that this car will absolutely eat up the Chasing Cars Mogul Challenge just over there behind us. Now, with the Transit Custom, I'll be honest, I'm not even going to try and get through the moguls. Why? Because it's front-wheel drive only. 8-speed automatic, there's no differential or traction control smarts really, and the long wheelbase combined with the ground clearance mean that you're going to get stuck on pretty much everything you come across. It's alright on dirt roads, and maybe the forthcoming trail version, which has all-wheel drive later this year, should help things, but for now, I've got a little secret weapon in the back of the Transit Custom that I think is a lot more fun than four-wheel driving anyway. Let's talk about how much stuff you can carry, or cargo capacity. It's actually relatively close in terms of payload between these two vehicles. The Sport dual cab with 5 seats is the worst in the Transit range by a long way, but it's still a little bit better than the Ranger. But of course, we have to take into account the fact that we may have a standard tub on here, but you can obviously get the Ranger with a cab chassis setup and do a lot of different modifications. But there is one ultimate gain for the Transit. Well, a couple actually. Firstly, we've got length of the load bay. Even though, as I said, this is the smallest in the Transit custom range, you can still open the 180-degree barn doors and find a huge space back there. As you can see, I've got my extra large 29er mountain bike in there. It fits so easily. I've had 5 bikes in there at a time, and even with all of those things in there, there's still more space. The same can't be said for the Ranger Sport. I can't fit my bike in the back of this with the front wheel on, which is just a bit of a shame. I know, again, there are other storage solutions. You can put an over the tailgate hanger. That works okay, but that's where we come to cargo security. Again, we have a locking roller cover here on the Ranger, which does help, but there's nothing better, I don't reckon, than 2 properly set up and alarmed van doors for keeping your cargo safe when you're off having a beer after a bike ride, or even just parked up in a country town. So the Ranger is much better off-road, but is that a real surprise to anyone? I don't think so. What is more interesting is how they behave on the road, where both of these vehicles are going to spend pretty much most of, if not all of their lives, because a bad ride quality and noisy driving can be rather unpleasant. And as far as dual cabs go, as you probably know, the Ford Ranger is one of, if not the best in the market when it comes to on-road manners. Certainly when fitted with the 3-litre V6, which is punchy and relatively quiet with a nicer tune than your average 4-cylinder turbo diesel. And yeah, it's definitely got a lot of grunt. It's a lot faster than the Transit in a straight line, that is for sure. Road noise is actually pretty well insulated, especially considering this car has those all-terrain tyres with standard road terrains, highway terrains. They are pretty quiet in the Ranger, and it's a very civilised vehicle to drive around most of the time. The big problem with this car versus the Transit is really ride quality. Now, I'm not saying the Ranger's bad. It's what I'd consider quite good, certainly for its limitations. You just sometimes get a jiggly, unsettled rear end, especially when it's unladen around town on concrete expansion joints and that sort of thing. It can be just a bit of a busy and a bit of a tiring vehicle to drive. Let's see how the Transit compares. Straight into the Transit, and let's talk about the ride quality a bit, because the Ranger uses a pretty simple, pretty old school live rear axle with front wishbones. This car, the Transit, uses a strut up front and a multi-link semi-trailing arm setup out the back, much more like you'd see on a passenger car. And in a lot of ways, it drives a lot more like a passenger car. The steering is lighter and more accurate. It's quieter in here, plus although van-like lower section of the interior is a giveaway, actually a lot of it is very car-like. The touchscreen up here, driving position though, yeah, again, it's like you're sitting at someone's dining table, is how upright you sit. But I actually really like that. I think it's comfortable on long drives. But back to the urban ride quality, where the Ranger is quite quiet and well insulated, the Transit is that little bit louder. You can hear the bumps and thumps a little bit more, but the trade-off is, especially at the rear when unladen, this van is a more compliant and more comfortable ride around town. There's just no two ways about it. It's got a more sophisticated suspension system and it rides better. Right, let's talk passive safety. Now, active safety systems get a lot of discussion these days, and actually in both of these Ford products, they're tuned really rather well, apart from the driver drowsiness warning, which I find to be a little bit overzealous. But lane keep assist, adaptive cruise control, all works quite well, and you can, as a bonus, turn adaptive cruise off. No, today I'm more worried about passive safety, how a car brakes, turns, and handles in extreme situations. And we would expect the van to do better. I've got a tightening right-hander here, 75 k's an hour, going to turn in and hit the brakes. And the van does okay, but it was quite oversteery. Quite a lot of front-end balance, and you can feel that the light rear end starts to slew round. Now, I was honestly expecting better because of how well this car drives at most times on a good country road. It feels remarkably car-like, but when you ask a lot of it, you do start to unravel a couple of chassis issues. And the braking was all over 40 meters, all over 43 meters, in fact, from 100 k's an hour to 0. And to be honest, I was expecting a slightly better result than that from the Transit Custom, certainly from the feeling I had on the road. But the numbers, they don't lie. So the Transit did pretty well in passive safety. What about the Ranger? Utes tend to get a bit of a bad rap. They're quite tall, braking distances are usually pretty poor. So let's put it through the same tightening off-camber right-hander and imagine that, you know, we got scared or something jumped out in front of us and we had to hit the brakes. Same speed, 75 k's an hour, hit the brakes, and the ABS, the traction control, stability control, all did what you'd expect. There was definitely more body movement, and the Ranger definitely understeers a bit more than the Transit, but you know, it gets the job done, and it shows that consistency and competence that you get from an Australian tuned package. Now, when we come to the brakes, this is what really surprised me. You know how I said the Transit didn't do too well at pretty much all 43 meters plus? Well, the Ranger consistently beat it. Still a long way shy of a passenger car, which would easily get under 40 meters, or certainly should at least get under 40 meters from 100 k's an hour to 0. The Ranger did actually better than the Transit, roughly a meter better in all of its stops. So yeah, that throws that theory into the toilet, I reckon. And so we come to the need for a verdict. And I might be a little bit biased here, because for me, my mountain bike and my two dogs, it absolutely has to be the Ford Transit Custom. The fact that it has a slightly nicer interior in my book and also drives a little bit better on the road seal the deal. But if this comparison test has shown anything, it's that dual cab utes have come a really long way to being really fantastic all-round vehicles, and I completely understand why Ford sells so many more of these Rangers to the Australian public than it does Ford Transit Customs. The upcoming Trail that's 4x4 may even out the playing field a bit, but I can still see that this, with all of the accessories and the aftermarket built around it, is the choice for so many families. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Am I right? Am I wrong? Or should we be buying something completely different? Let me know. Hit subscribe to Chasing Cars if you enjoyed the video. And as always, thank you very much for watching.